Okay, it's 11:30. Well, it's
Showtime.
Whatever time it is, it's the half hour and it's showtime. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to welcome everybody and to do quick introductions. This is our session on direct mail strategies and best practices. This is an area where legal aid programs are starting to show a growing interest. And we've had a number of programs report, particularly report doing it, but not being successful, but planning to try again. So this is a really important session for us to be doing at this conference. I want to welcome our expert outside consultants from 5 Maples Development Communications, which is a lovely name for a firm located in Vermont. Sarah Gnerre.
Okay, it's pretty close.
And Gary Henricksen. And then Helen Meyer, who is the development director at Pine Tree. We very much wanted this to be about trees in New England, and there you have it. Pine Tree is one of the programs that has had a little more success than others, and Helen will be talking about what she has done there. Put your questions in the chat box as we go along. You are all muted, but we really want your questions, and Helen's going to be following them, and they will take them as we go along. And with that, I will turn it over, I think, to Helen.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, especially on a Friday, the end of the conference. We really appreciate it. And so I am really pleased to be here to talk about my experience, but I'm even more excited that we have some real experts, Sarah and Gary, here to talk about all the experiences that they have. And I'll let Sarah and Gary introduce themselves and 5 Maples, and we can get started.
Great. Well, 5 Maples is a firm that does copywriting, design, print, and mail and social media work mainly for nonprofits, 95% nonprofits. And we are focused on raising money for development managers. We have been in business for over 20 years. And one thing that we've had a lot of interest in is how do you get new donors as a nonprofit? We have rented around 600 mailing lists in the last decade plus to both companies and nonprofits. And we have some experience and some, stripes on our backs from doing that. And so we just want to share what the principles in particular of getting new donors and retaining those new donors are. So you can decide whether you might want to try it.
Yeah, and I'll just share that I'm Sarah Gnerre, and I have been a development director and run programs in a university setting, in a healthcare setting, and some arts organizations, and one social service if you consider SPCAs to be a social service agency. And so I've sat in your chair and I've tried this, and it's a really good information to know. And the question about is there a way I can acquire donors? We hear that a lot. So we're excited to share what we have for you today in some different from some different perspectives. But we want to start to hear how you're doing. So we've got a couple of quick polls just to sort of let us know who's here. And if we could get those underway to start, just give us a quick answer, and it'll just be a few seconds of this. Just pop your answers in and then we'll know. Okay, oh, a few more coming in. A couple more seconds. This will tell us how many people are in the session as well. So please pop your answer in there. Even if you don't know, take a good guess. Okay, so it looks like it's something like 2/3 of the participants today are less than 1,000 donors in a single year. So if you had 6 years worth, you might have 3,000 donors or something like that. And there we go. Okay, can we, I'm assuming everybody has a direct mail program. We had this, we can end this one and then run the second one. Okay, almost everyone. Not everyone has a direct mail program. Cool. It's more like about 1/5 of people don't have a direct mail program. Okay, so that's really helpful. Great. All right. Well, this will be good information whether you have a program or you don't have a program, because our title is, Are you ready? If so, here's what you can do. If not, here's what you can do to get ready. Okay. So I'd like to turn it right over to Helen to talk a little bit about Pine Trees program. Thank you very much for answering those questions.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Pine Tree's experience with purchasing a mailing list and doing direct mail appeals. So this is a little text heavy, this slide, but I'm sort of going to walk you through our successes and the not successes that we don't always talk about. So the first time Pine Tree Legal Assistance did purchase a mailing list or rented a mailing list and did a mailing was in 2015, and we did it as part of an endowment campaign, the very end, our public phase of the endowment campaign. And so the mailing list that we got went to about 26,500 households. And the cost for renting the list was not that much, but obviously doing a mailing to that many households is really a big cost. And we knew that we weren't going to break even our first year, but we were really doing it because we wanted to sort of do this big endowment campaign, make a big splash, and then build off the success and the momentum of that campaign to launch a more sophisticated development and fundraising program, specifically targeting people outside of the legal community. And so this was one way that we wanted to attract donors who could become long-term donors, really build up our mailing list. So those were some of our goals. So we got 159 new donors from that. So that felt fantastic for us. 159 donors was great. Looking at how many people we donated to it, so it's about a 0.6% success rate, which I think looking at that number is maybe a little more disappointing, but it's also sort of what we were expecting because that was at the time what we had thought sort of the national standard was. The first year, it only brought in about $9,000 in donations, which wasn't a lot. Our letter actually asked people to think about a $25 donation, so we weren't expecting a lot of donations. But what was really impressive for us was that a lot of people came back and started donating every year. Not everyone, we had about 92 donors who came in through that who made more donations. But going down to the bottom of that column, there have been 640 lifetime gifts and almost $50,000 that's come in those years. So it's definitely been a really important long-term investment for us. A lot of people who we acquired through that initial effort are now major donors. We have people who do stock transfers to us that first gave to us in 2015 as a result of that mailing. So really successful. Going on to the second one, I was so excited about that success that we wanted to try it again. And the idea that I had was to do a small regional appeal. I wanted to do a county in Maine that's very rural, that's where we have an office, but not a lot of other social service agencies have offices. And I really wanted it to be like, we're here, we're in your neighborhood, support us. So we went ahead and bought this list. It was pretty small and it was incredibly unsuccessful. We had 4 donors come in, 265 donations, and none of them came back. And so this was really disappointing. And it was a moment of reflection for our board's fundraising committee. We really thought about, I presented the results and I thought, well, this was a failure. really too bad. But it sparked a discussion about why it wasn't successful. And what our committee decided was that we just hadn't done the legwork in that region to be successful. We hadn't done any outreach, that we sent this mailing out without laying the groundwork. And that what we should do next is to maybe pick a different region, maybe one that's less rural, less far away from us, and start off slow. And so we put into place a new strategy to really build awareness in a region, and then think about coming back to this. And so that's something we're still working on now. But it also really highlighted why the 2015 mailing list was so successful. And I've been reflecting on it a lot lately as we think about, preparing for this session and why we had such a positive experience. And I think a lot of it did have to do with the laying the groundwork and the messaging that went before that, because we were doing this big endowment. We had done a lot of press for Pine Tree in general. We did advertising on public radio when we did the public appeal portion of the endowment campaign, and the list that we were using at the time was people who support public broadcasting. And so I think there was just that tie-in that really helped a lot. And so I think a really important factor is making sure that there's a lot of awareness, so that when our letter hit the mailboxes, people had already knew who we were. The third appeal that we did was in 2020. And this one, we were really trying to pivot because we had a lot of in-person events planned for 2020. We really were thinking about donor acquisition in terms of friends and family, having board members bring friends and acquaintances to mingle events around the state. Obviously, we canceled those because of COVID, and we decided to try another appeal. We really wanted to focus this on sort of the national crisis that people were feeling, both around COVID and social justice issues and inequities. And so that was the theme of that letter. We purchased 36,495 households. The cost was a little bit higher for lots of reasons. We just did a different mailing house, lots of other things. This one was a little bit less successful. I think it too goes to the fact that we hadn't been doing the legwork ahead of time, but we had 77 new donors. And that it hasn't quite been a full 2 years since we've done that, but already we have 133 lifetime gifts, and we've raised $11,000 so far. So I think that too will turn into a long-term success financially, but definitely those upfront costs we knew would be high. And when we were considering the 2020 appeal, we knew that it would take a few years for it to be financially break even.
For the next.
Yeah, the next one, before I turn it over to Gary, I wanted to just show one of the things that we did to personalize the first appeal that was really successful. And I'm highlighting this because it's something that Gary and Sarah are going to talk about later in the presentation. These are photos that we took of the envelopes that came back. On the remittance envelope, we asked people to fill out this section about why they give and why it says, tell us why you feel it's important to support justice for all. And we were really blown away by the beautiful notes that people wrote to us. Not everyone filled it out, but a lot of people did. The first one up there is a personal story about someone's son. And then a lot of things about just why justice is so important. And so it was really nice, great way to get to know some new donors and know what's important to them. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I think it was just a great opportunity to personalize the letter and the responses for the donors. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary.
Okay.
These notes that they got back from people show that there were people in the mailing list, the rental list, that were passionate about social justice. And so that's one of the keys about getting a list, is that it's important that the people in the rental list are people that are going to resonate with your case for giving, with the mission of your organization, with what you want them to be able to say, hey, yeah, that's me, that's what I support. I belong in a group of supporters. If it's just, the random house owner in a region, there's a pretty good chance that they don't actually aren't down with that mission, that they just don't see themselves as one of your constituents. And so that's one of the principles of rent a list is, can you find a list of people who are going to be and want to be your supporters? That could be the difference between a 0.1% or 0.2% response rate and a 0.6% response rate. So here Helen has put further information about the 3 lists that went with these 3 mailings that she's just described. And I think by looking at what she said here, we get we'll derive some principles that we can continue with about these lists. So donors to public radio have a certain kind of view of life, a certain kind of view of how society should work, of how people should get help. And so that's an automatic selection of a group that has going to have more propensity to want to donate to an organization like hers, and so which has a mission of social justice. So that's an important part of the success of this list. And if Helen wants to, or Sarah wants to, they can mention why exclude attorneys, which they say here, but basically, probably the average attorney is going to view their organization as somewhat as a competitor to them. So it's probably not a great idea to, a waste of money to include them in any of these lists. Well, now let's look at the middle list here, which raised almost nothing. It was a smaller list, but its response rate was 0.1%. Helen's already described how it was a rural county. Not only did they lack brand recognition in there, but the kind of people who live there are probably not the kind of people who are interested in social justice, which they probably view as, all those people in cities who, don't deserve their help. So I'm making a generalization here, but this is the kind of thing you have to think about when you're saying, well, is this audience the right people to respond? And that's, of course, what Helen is suggesting here when she's saying we decided it was the wrong region. By shifting the mid-coast, they're shifting to not only a wealthier area, but a more liberal and more progressive area. Finally, and then of course she mentions the issue of brand recognition. And finally, the third one, which is kind of intermediate in response, was households that have donated to social justice and social charitable causes, at least according to the organization that the list is being rented from, what we call the list compiler, who I will describe in just a minute. By the way, I should mention that 5 Maples was not involved in any of these mailings. These were before we got to know Helen and her organization, but she suggested we should participate in the session because of our knowledge of and experience in rental lists. So we hope that the principles we're talking about can help. Sarah, can we see the next slide? So here's the 5 key points about whether you're ready to do a rental list. The more well-known your organization is in the community in which you're going to try to raise money, the better chance that you have. I mean, this is just a principle of marketing. A company with absolutely no brand recognition is not going to sell a product until they do some work to create brand recognition. And of course, they had this great advertising campaign going on. In fact, what I think is an essential part of the success they had with the public radio list was they were advertising on public radio at the same time. So the people who were likely to get who are going to get their mailing were likely to have been listening and gotten a little bit of brand recognition, brand equity in their brains because they were hearing the advertisement. So that's really helpful. So you have to ask yourself, do people know me? And down here in the right corner, we have a sort of notional graph. It's not real data. It's more conceptual that really just says, what's your chance of response? And you can see how we start. Here's person in some way already has a relationship with what you do. Here we've got brand recognition. Here we've got some brand recognition, but really don't understand you. And here's never heard of you. And so the people who've never heard of you, it's just too soon for most of them to respond. Okay, Sarah will talk a little bit about how to write a professional, well done letter that actually gets donations. Another thing we're not going to talk about, but it's pretty clear that anybody who hasn't heard of you, or this is the first time they've been solicited, they're going to go on your website and check you out. So all of this stuff is important to be on your website. I've already talked about the fact we need to be able to rent a list of people who are likely to support social justice causes. That's the percentage you give, and to filter that list in some way to make sure that they have the capacity to give. And that's what was happening with that first very successful list. And your first time donor renewal rate is 30% or more. So Sarah's also going to talk about retention, because if you get a new donor and you don't keep them, then you've just thrown your money away. Because the next thing that we're going to say, Sarah, if you could page down, is, I think it's the next thing we're going to say.
Here we go.
Oh, okay. More or less information. What I was going to say is you're almost certainly going to raise money on the first mailing. You're only going to make money with retention. So getting your retention rates up and average gift up is really important. And Helen referred to that by the fact that they kept people, and even some of them even became major donors. Okay, so now let's have the next slide. So here's some information. This helps ask some of the questions in the chat. Where do you get lists? Okay, I'm going to talk about two general kinds of lists. A marketed list, which is that many organizations, in fact, tens of thousands of organizations, mostly for-profits, will make their list available for rental via third-party marketing agencies, so they don't have to deal with you directly. And this website, which I mentioned here, has 60,000 available lists on it. Most are for consumer marketing, because keep in mind that nonprofit fundraising is only 2% of the economy. So obviously, 98% of the available lists are focused on for-profit marketing. These lists cost between 15 and 25 cents per record, and there's usually a minimum purchase. So for example, I checked yesterday on the for the state of Maine. Well, actually, I checked yesterday with the organization that markets the public radio list nationally. Public radio has over 1 million records available for rental, and so they do have a 10,000 record minimum. So in your geography, whatever that is, if they only have like 4,000 records available to rent in the geography that you want to market to or raise money in, you need to pay for all the maximum amount of 10,000. So that kind of boosts, that's going to make your cost for the rental list 35 or 45 cents each. So that's where it's helpful maybe to be working at a state level or a regional level. And another thing about renting a list like public radio is they're going to want to approve your mailing date, and they're going to want to see your mailer, the design of what you're saying and sending out, because they're concerned about anything that goes out to their list. They don't want their donors to get something they wouldn't approve of, but also they don't want to get their donors to get something that they feel is going to be competitive to them and take away those donors. So obviously, Pine Tree Legal was able to get approval in that mailing, or their list broker was able to get approval, because here's the thing. You don't, as a nonprofit, you don't deal directly with the list marketers. You don't deal directly with the data compilers. You always go through a list broker, or if your marketing agency or your printer mailer is also a list broker like we are, then they handle that for you. Okay, one final caution about these lists is that they may be rented to a lot of people, and so they might be a little bit oversold. Those people might be getting multiple donations or multiple solicitations from different organizations to that specific list. I have no idea if public radio is oversold. That's something the marketing agency could probably, who represents that list, could probably help. The other thing is they're not going to rent you their $1,000 donors. They're going to rent you their $5, $10, $20, maybe $100 donors, because they don't want you going after their their big fish. So they don't want you taking away the priority of those big donors. So that's appropriate though for direct mail and for direct mail acquisition. You're not asking for $1,000 gift. You're hoping to get a $25 gift or a $50 gift or $100 gift and start to build on that. Okay, compiled lists. These are lists that data compilers assemble, and Axiom is the leading data compiler in the United States. They're a public company. They claim to have up to 200 data points on 200 million households in the United States. They try to follow you throughout your life as you change jobs or residences, as you buy houses, as you order things online, and etc. They're always reaching out to marketers and buying information and assembling it into a database. Okay, you probably have never heard of Axiom, because they pretty much fly under the radar. All the noise about privacy is really about Facebook and Instagram and Google and etc. But they're out there collecting information, and they're bucketing it into things such as you're interested in health, or you support environmental causes, or your political orientation is such and such. And also they have demographics on you, like how much does your house cost for? Are you a renter? And all those kinds of things. The cost for those is lower than the cost for a marketed list, and the minimums are quite low. So they're easier to access for a smaller organization. Next slide. Okay, there's one other list type which Helen hasn't tried yet. I should mention that her first list was a marketed list, but the next two lists were from list compilers. Okay, so a lookalike list is a list in which we or another agency submits your donor file, and you need at least 3,000 donors for this, to a modeling agency that creates a lift model, as it's called, which predicts what are the characteristics of people in Axiom's mailing list database, or households in Axiom's database that has the most chance of responding. And then those records, or the best potential responders, are rented and mailed. And the cost is fairly reasonable, but unfortunately, in our experience, the results are usually in the same range as these other marketed and compiled lists. So you'd hope that this would be magic, but unfortunately, it really isn't. It may result in a higher average gift though. And in the next case study, the case study I'm going to show you, that did indeed happen. Next slide. Oh, by the way, question in this in the chat: what are the implications for our own donors' privacy with a lookalike list? When we submit a list for a lookalike, the company that runs the algorithm deletes the list when they're done, and we delete the list that they're done, so that list does not persist. The model is created, so the model persists, but your donors are not actually in the model once the model's been created. Hope that helps.
Gary, did you see the prior question as well? There's one more.
I did not. What was the prior question?
Do marketing agencies tend to disclose to whom else they have rented a particular list, or how many they have sold it to?
They will never do that. They don't want you to know. And actually, the list owner doesn't want you to know either. So they're concerned that, if their donors find out that, hey, they've just rented your name 50 times in the last year, which would be an exaggeration, of course, that would be a huge negative. So this is all kind of flying, in the dark a little bit. All right, so list mailing is almost always used initially. Retention rates are usually in the range of 0.5%. Anything over 0.5% is considered darn good. And whether it's going to break even is determined by retention. And because the people who are responding to direct mail, and they're responding at a lower level, By the way, many of them may give online, but still they're generated by direct mail. Their retention, these people are not at the start going to be assigned to major gift officers. So the only way you can retain these people is you've got to communicate to them. And Sarah will address that. Without a communications program, a solicitation program that communicates throughout the year, you can forget about having great retention of these donors. Next slide. Let's see, that there was, so before I go into this, I don't know if I fully addressed earlier question. Can you rent, can you go talk to the local public radio station or, another nonprofit or whatever and rent their list? And the answer is no. They don't want to talk to you. They only want you to talk to the marketing agency that they have placed their list with. In fact, they probably have an exclusive agreement with the marketing agency. Who's that agency marketing to? They're not marketing to you. They're marketing to people like Five Maples and all the list brokers out there. So that's kind of like how the market is structured. And it's a matter of efficiency for the list owners like public radio. Public radio doesn't want to talk to every random organization that wants to rent their list. They don't want to talk to anybody. They just want their marketing agency to take care of it for them. And so that's why the market is structured in that way. Okay, so your printer mailer might be a list broker, might not, or they might recommend a separate list broker, or somebody like us who is all of the above might be able to help you. Okay, so here's this is not social justice. Exactly. It's a food insecurity nonprofit in a major metropolitan area. They're not a food bank. So that was another question. Can I go to a food bank and rent their list? And the answer is no. Actually, most of the food banks participate in a national organization called Feeding America. And Feeding America provides marketing and logistical and other services to them. And one thing that they do is they provide marketing and even direct mail services to food banks. And so, yes, you could go to Feeding America and try to rent the list if you went through the agency that rents their list. This food insecurity nonprofit couldn't do that because Feeding America won't rent to them because they consider them a competitor to the food banks in this metropolitan area. However, so we tried some other lists. They have good brand recognition. So we tested 2 marketed lists and 2 lookalike lists. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the initial results. And we see that we were mailing 10,000, which is the minimum for each of the lists that we got. All the lists were Disabled American Veterans, Habitat for Humanity, and a lookalike list. You can see one list, Habitat for Humanity, did quite well in terms of response rate, $33 average gift. And so it didn't break even on the first mailing, but it wasn't that bad at $1.40 to raise $1. So one could hope that with renewals, it was going to have a good ROI. The response rate on the lookalike list was low, below 0.5%, but it had a really high average gift. In fact, it had one gift of 3,000, another of 1,000, and several of 100, 125, 250. That's unusual on a rental list. And it means somehow with that modeling thing, we were getting in the mailboxes of people who had both propensity and capacity, whereas these other marketing lists, we probably weren't getting to the people with the most capacity. Let's look now at what the multi-year ROI was on the next slide. Okay, so the rows in yellow, those were the initial results that I just first showed. In pink, blue, and green, we see for the next additional gifts in the same fiscal year, plus the gifts in the next 2 years. And we see actually quite a high renewal rate for these folks and pretty good sustainment of the average gift. So that by the time that we're done, we'll see that they had a positive, that 2 of the lists had a positive ROI. I think that's probably on the next slide, but I really want to point out here that these people who gave to this list solicitation early in November were solicited 2 more times before the end of the year and multiple times in the next year, along with other communications. So that's what I mean by, you have, once you get a donor, you got to communicate like heck, especially in the first year, to make sure that you retain them. And Sarah will say a few more words about that. Next slide. Okay, so here's the cost to raise $1 for the overall amount raised. We see that the disabled American veterans never got close to break even, but Habitat for Humanity did. We've actually had some success with Habitat for Humanity for certain organizations, and for certain organizations, it's failed. And so we see it was a slight break even after 3 years, about 15% positive. But here we raise, for every $1 that was spent, $2 were raised. So the lookalike list worked really well for them. Now, I mentioned we've rented 600 lists. We've had a lot of failures. In fact, we've had more failures than successes. And that is just the nature of the rental list business in direct mail. And it's also really true in online advertising as well. So that's why I say rough road ahead. The only way you know if it's going to try is you measure yourself against that earlier slide where we asked, do these questions apply to you? Are you in a better situation like Pine Tree Legal was, where they got something going on that's giving them some visibility? And then the only way you can know, is it going to work, is you're going to have to try it. If you think you can try it, if your CEO or your executive director or your finance manager or your board feels like it's worth making the attempt, spending $15,000 or $10,000 to give it a try, or $5,000 to give it a try, see what happens, it might be worth trying. But you need to make sure that you follow up with those people and track it over at least 3 years. Okay, and you'll notice that again, best practice stewardship, this organization is really on top of follow-ups. And so these are the kind of things that really make a difference. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, so that's really exciting. So if you're ready, looked at that checklist we did in the beginning. You've got some good PR. You've got you've got the budget, and you've got the gut to go ahead and try this, because you really have to do some testing, as Gary shared. But some of the preparing the ground, some of the work that has to be part of your systems to keep all of your donors. So we're talking really about retention for everyone. If you are sending impact reports before your next gift, so basically in between the ask, you get some, this one's a healthcare example, Cape Cod Health, they're sending the celebratory newsletter, let's call it a newsletter or an impact report, either way. They're saying your money, here's what you did. You helped these people, you saved a life, so you're giving people some really concrete evidence that their money, the hard-earned money that they shared with you made some kind of a difference in someone's life. And that's really what donors want to know. Did I make a good decision giving my money to you? Did it do the thing I wanted to get done? And we saw this passionate, justice interested people in Helen's, from Helen's mailing. Make sure your board members are part of it. You can have board members helping you with this by looking at your new donors, whether you've acquired them from a rental or from some other, they showed up at an event and you transform them into regular donors. They should get a thank you, not just in writing, but Philanthropy Burke's research. She wrote the book called Donor-Centered Fundraising. She says if you call those new donors within a week of their first gift, or if a board member calls them, they will give 40% more the next time. So these are just some things to consider, that you may have these systems already in place. Maybe a good idea just to take a little bit closer look. Writing a good thank you letter where you're really very personal. We'll talk about being personal a little bit more in a moment. Asking multiple times a year. Why? Not because you're being a pest, But because your donors, your prospective donors are busy and they get a lot of mail, either in their mailbox, their physical mailbox, their email box, people are busy and they will miss things. So you are better served to give them 4 or 5 times a year not to miss you. So they see at least one of those, and the ones that become very loyal, they will start looking for them so that they make sure that they give their check. But the people who aren't, fully committed yet, they think this is a good idea, but they haven't given more than once or twice, they need a lot of repetition. And they won't have any idea how many times you sent letters. They'll just know that they're a donor. Special notes on your appeals is a really good way to make someone feel like someone's paying attention to them, which is really what donors want. Your best prospective donors are people who already know you. So we got that sense with Pine Tree, where they were doing advertising on public radio. The list was the public radio list. But if you've got past donors in your database, and say you stop mailing to people after they haven't given in 3 years, well, what we've discovered by looking at the gift file of clients who use our 5 Maples communication, our appeal service, 6 years back, and we see this across all different kinds of organizations. You can see on this chart, is donors in 2021 who last gave in the year of that first column. So for instance, 250 people gave in 2021 who last gave in 2019. And then 220 people in this list gave back in 2011, and they hadn't given in 8 years, and then they suddenly give again. So this particular organization's chart, you see it goes back to 2016, then it drops almost below 1%. But then if you're looking in that the red headlined column, renewed percent, you can see that back to 2012, there's a 1% return. And if you remember from just a couple slides ago, a good return on a rental list is 0.5%. So in your own database, you likely have people that are more likely to give than those who you rent. So that's another source of potentially bringing people back into the fold. Okay, so I'll look for questions. Feel free to ask. I think we'll be sharing these slides with you. Some of this data you might want to look at again. Here's another point I would just like to make before we finish up today. We have a lot of organizations. Organizations that have changed, Tim. Yep. That's an interesting question. I will address that in just a moment. I just want to make this point that some organizations are switching to online giving because mainly it's cheaper. It's free, except for the time it takes you to write the emails. The problem with that logic is that although multi-channel giving, email, social media, although that's growing, and Blackbaud reports it every year that it's increased a certain amount, it's still, even though double-digit increases, it's still only 12 or 13% of all giving comes by online. So that means 88 in this example from the Blackbaud Charitable Giving Institute, 88.9% of all giving is still by check. So we really promote a combination so that you're not missing out on people who want to do things online, but so that you're getting your asks in print in this tactile mode that people trust, because they can look up the address, they can check out the website. With an email, and no one ever knows whether it's a spoof or not. And if they pay attention to that, there's always a little bit of trepidation around online asking, especially when that's all they're getting from you.
Sarah, can I jump
yes.
in here?
Yes,
I just want
please.
to say, when Sarah and I were preparing for the session, I asked a lot of questions about the online giving stat. And I just wanted to share one of Pine Tree's experiences, which is that we do see a lot of online gifts, but a lot of them are in response to our mailings. So we know that we send a piece of mail, usually in very early December, right around Thanksgiving, like the week after we wanted to hit mailboxes. And then we receive a lot of gifts online those months, but we know that it's because we sent them mail, like we're tracking how we reached out to the donors. And so even a lot of our online giving is a direct result of the mail that they're seeing. Not that we're doing multi-channel as well, but it's the mail, I think, for us that's still
Yeah,
has a
it's
huge
interesting.
impact.
It's a case for keeping going with your print.
Yeah.
So Tim's question was, organizations that have changed a lot might see less renewal of lapsed donors. And, as long as you're keeping those impact reports coming, and if you are, the impact reports again are reporting to the donor what you're doing with their money, what the organization, how the organization is spending their donated gifts to change and save lives, depending on your what your programs are. And so if you're following that and you're sending appeals, which are solicitation to ask for money, if you're sending those for 6 years, they gave a gift for 6 more years, you're going to get asked. And then maybe you stop asking. And then the impact reports, you can send those maybe 3 or 4 years back. You can send those just to say, here's what your money is doing. And as long as those people getting that impact report are getting the asks, if they are reading those. And one really important point for some people that are spending more on newsletters than on solicitations is to recalibrate that. Send the newsletters to people whose money you're spending, rather than hoping that they will suddenly be inspired to give. And sometimes people are, but if they're not responding to the direct ask in the letter, they're probably not even reading the newsletter. I mean, that's my guess. You can try it. Sometimes there's other reasons to send a newsletter to non-donors, if you're selling services, for instance, but that's a different message. So the things that you can really do, and we're just going to give you a couple more things here because we're within 10 minutes of the end, and we want to leave a little time in case there are any questions we have time to answer. We suggest that you bend the curve by using excellent stewardship and use really different strategies for first-time donors than you do for your multi-year donors. So the first-time donors, they need that phone call, they need that immediate recognition that they've chosen you, and your friends, the ones that are giving year after year, they just need to know that their money's being well spent. One of the things that Helen's going to talk about too is going what I'm calling radically personal. And we've already talked about multi-channel messaging. So I'll just show you what an example of radically personal is. And you can see, I know this is maybe a little bit small here, but if you can see it on your screen, you can see in this reply form in the middle, where we don't just say call our agency if you have a question, here's the phone number, we say call Susan. Because can you imagine the person does have a question and they actually pick up the phone and now they have to tell their story 3 times to get to the right person? Why not just give them the right person's name? So this is just a small thing, but it makes a big difference on the donor's end. And I don't know if you want to talk about this here, Helen, about how you did this similar thing that you shared in the beginning.
Yes, we did. So we also, we had shared the pictures of asking people why they give, which we record in our donor management system. So we've got that written down. And then when we get donations, our executive director does a handwritten thank you note that goes to the donor, whether it's a $5 gift or $5,000 gift, it's always a handwritten thank you note. And it's personalized too. And so it's really helpful to have these records so we know why people are giving, so that it's not just a standard thank you note and they get the same handwritten thank you note every year, but it really is personalized. And that has had a huge impact on our donor retention. And even though in the weeks after a big mailing, it's really, our director gets hand cramps and kind of complains about it. It's like the one piece of our fundraising program that I think has been most impactful are those notes. It really does go a long way to create a personal relationship. And then we also do personal notes from either board members or staff on annual reports as they go out. And I think that really helps too. So people really feel as though we know them and we're recognizing them and that it's a personal relationship.
Yeah, this is really smart. It takes some effort to write. We recommend when sending your appeals that you flag, some of you are small, but if you had say 500 donors or you had 1,000 donors, you might peel off the top 100 of those. So you just note it in the file, and then we actually send those back to you all printed with all of the pieces that go in the package and with first class stamps, so that you have a week or so to put handwritten notes on those 100, and the rest, the rest of your file gets the regular letter, and that goes out, also, with the nonprofit stamp on it. But that's another chance to do exactly what Helen's doing, making the person feel like someone actually knows who they are. And that's really important. And we forget it because, we have a million things to do and we're trying to bring in the money. Here's a memorial letter. And we tried this out with a hospice, and we know that people skim the letters. People don't read every word, and thank yous are usually, they usually, thank you so much for your gift in honor of your friend who recently passed away. Did you know that we do this, that, and the other thing? That's usually what we do in development. We just launch into talking about ourselves as soon as we can, because we're talking about a person who's passed away. And instead, we mention the person 3 times in this letter. We thank you for honoring the memory of your friend. We're so glad that you're willing to support the thing that your friend cared so much about. And every time I say your friend, it's their name, their actual name going in there. And so, assuming you've got a database that you can pull that name right back out of, because you enter it, along with the gift. And here's another radically personal element. On your thank yous, or even on your appeals, to have a picture of the person who's in charge of spending their money. So often it's an executive director, sometimes it's a volunteer who's doing the direct work with your clients, or a staff member like Melissa here is the head of development. So these are all things you can do that are not, they're not radical. I'm just calling it radically personal. It's pretty a simple thing to add the names in. And then we have a few takeaways just to summarize the points. And, Gary and Helen, feel free to jump in. Test different lists. Gary talked about 3 lists. One didn't work so well. The other 2, one worked really well. The other one was pretty good. Practice good stewardship. Ask and communicate more. We're probably not doing it enough, most of us. It's a lot of work, but it doesn't matter how hard it is for us to do it. It matters if the donor feels like they were appreciated. And then we've given you a link here, so when you get the file, you can click right into how to write fundraising letters, and there's things in there like avoid the word we and our, write in the first tense. There's a whole bunch of checklist of things that you will find really valuable. And then the really fun thing to do is to take that checklist and put it right next to your last appeal, and you do your edit on your own letter and see what you could have done better so that you're more ready next time. And you can do that for thank you letters too. And that's our show. I also I gave you some contact information, and then also I gave you from Penelope Burke's book, who I mentioned earlier, a script for board members to make phone calls, thank you calls. It's really simple, so it's in there. We don't have to go over it, but I think we have a couple of minutes if there's any more questions or.
And I'll just make one last comment for any LSC funded agencies out there. Community representatives on your board are great for making phone calls. We've had a lot of success with that. And it's a great way to engage them in your development committee by making those phone calls, have a script ready, give them the names. It's been great for our agency.
How many do you give to each board member, Helen? Just curious.
Usually it's no more than 3 at a time. And then it sort of depends too. It depends on whether the board member is as prompt as I would like them to be or not. But usually not too many. We don't want it to be overwhelming, but if you've got enough people on your board, it makes a big difference.
Yep. And then at 3, if somebody doesn't do their work, you can just say, okay, send them back to me and I'll take care of them. It just, I used to tell people that if you don't think you're going to get to it, I know you said you would, but maybe you won't. If you won't, just send it back to me. It's fine. And then we've got a question, Gary, about testing a small test of a bigger list.
Oh, am I on mute or can I talk?
You can talk. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, if we're talking about a rental list, because the response rates are low, if you're only mailing to 1,000 and you get 25 gifts. It's a little uncertain as to whether that was just noise or if that's repeatable. So it's better to try around 5,000 at a minimum, and you'll probably get a little bit more reliable information.
Question, your next, Dana, your next question about credit card info on the remittance. I agree. No one's gonna, they're so small, there's no room to write all the numbers, and most of your donors, I know you know this statistic, or maybe you don't, but 67 years old is the average donor age in America. And so when you start thinking of how small those envelopes are, we recommend using a reply device. And I think we showed a couple in the example, the one from the healthcare, Susan Oldred's healthcare agency they're in several states, but that gives you white space. It gives room for old people who can't see as well as they do. We know we can't see anymore. When we see that you gave us room, we're just very delighted. It's much better. And then the other thing with credit card, a lot of agencies have been asking us about just putting a QR code on the reply form. So for someone who wants to fill it out, there it is. You don't have to put any credit card information. You will probably put a check in, but if you want to do it online, you just shine your phone at it and you don't have to fill all that out. And your phone knows who you are. At least mine does. It fills it out automatically. And then do you use matching gift appeal or monthly option? Yes, I would say we sometimes put a standard ask appeal, which might be if we knew they gave $100 last time, we would have an ask string that would say, would you consider a gift of 500, 250, or 100? So the 100, they're a comfortable gift, it's in there, but there's a very subtle upgrade request as part of that. And then there may even be a box on there saying, would you consider a monthly gift of 25, 10, or 5? And I think there's some information about, Gary might be able to speak to it better, but about most people that do subscription giving monthly will do it online, right, Gary? So
that's right. The place where you're actually going to pick up monthly donors is on your donation page, by giving them a very clear and easy to choose option to give, $10 or $20 a month. Not too many people, again, I don't want to give you my credit card and that kind of thing. So not too many people actually fill out the opportunity to give monthly via the reply form. But the QR code, yeah, that's becoming it's becoming rapidly popular as a way to get people to your donation page.
Yep. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Gary. Sorry.
Yeah, of course, they have to be willing then to conduct the transaction on their phone.
Yep, the phone knows everything. So I hope we've been helpful. And if you think of questions later, definitely feel free to send us a note. We'd love to work with you, help you raise more money. And on our fundraising blog, if you're too small or you're not ready yet, there's tons of good information. I can't tell you how many people get to the point, clients of ours, or people not quite there, and then they finally say, okay, we're ready to stop doing it all ourselves. We have enough. And can you help us now? So in the meantime, they've been using all of the hacks that we share with you on the website. So jump in and steal and adapt and use anything out there that might give you some help in raising more.
I just want to say thank you so much to Sarah and Gary. I've learned so much. This has been like such an amazing experience working for you and working with you. And I'm so glad that you were able to share that with the broader legal aid community too. And I see there's one last question from Tim. Have you ever used a political giving list?
Yes, we have used a propensity to vote progressive or to vote Democrat. Also, we've used a Democrat voter registration list. And I would say, because it's helpful, but it's not very specific to a specific cause. So if we can find something that's a little closer to the cause, that's probably going to work better. Again, it's a question of testing. How does it work for you? I think for social justice, if you can get more progressive in how to select a list and including political giving, that could be really helpful.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, do we just sign off, Meredith?
Mute myself. I just did. Can you hear me?
Yes, do we just
Okay.
stop the share and?
You just sign off and thank you, everybody. And we'll have another session starting in 15.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Wow, it's cool to see everybody once we signed off.